What is up, guys? If you're watching this video, you want a complete breakdown of every class and subclass in Baldur's Gate 3. Well, that's exactly what I'll be providing today. I have over 260 hours in the game, as well as over 120 hours in honor mode. So this has been tested. Every single thing I've been talking about has been tested in the highest difficulty. I have completed honor mode and gotten the golden dice, and that's why I have the authority here to tell you what I believe is the best options you have. Now, I'm going to be breaking this down into each class, giving them a ranking, giving them a numeric score of where I think they basically sit in the game, as well as talking about each subclass. So, breaking it down on a class and subclass basis. I'm going to be doing this for a roleplay and a power gaming standpoint. So, I'm going to be telling you what I think actually is the most fun to play. And then I'm also going to be telling you what I think is the best to play. And specifically, I'm going to be putting a section in each time for honor mode and telling you how I feel these classes and subclasses really perform in the highest difficulty, which I think should be the ultimate test and everybody should be talking about. But I'm also going to be putting in there what I think is really fun to play and good for role playing. So let's not waste any more time and start with the first class, which is Barbarian. What do I think about Barbarian? I got a huge list of notes over here. So let's actually break this down. So just talking about the class in general before we break down the subclasses, this is a really strong class both for a role play and or lower difficulty playthrough and a very high difficulty honor mode playthrough. The reason it is that for beginners in the game, Barbarian is one of the easiest classes to play. You basically rage, you go up, you hit things. That's it. It's super easy. However, on the harder modes, by using Tavern Brawler, by using throw builds, specifically in Rage Throw, is extremely potent because prone status does not have a saving throw, so it's one of the strongest status elements in the game. So Barbarian is an S tier class, 100%. Barbarian itself would be going in the S tier. Now, I will say this, since I'm going to be breaking it down to subclasses, you'll see how different subclasses do have a little bit of a difference. But for both role playing or just casual play of Baldur's Gate 3, and also for honor mode, hardest difficulty playthroughs, we're playing legit. Definitely Barbarian is an S plus tier class. I gave it the second best class in Baldur's Gate 3. You'll see soon what is my first best class. But let's actually break it down on a subclass basis now. Berserker is by far the best subclass of Barbarian. There's no question in my mind about that. Berserker gets basically improvised weapon and enraged throw. Enraged throw is what you're going to be using specifically on the harder difficulties. It basically makes it where you can, between twice and 3 times a turn, if you're doing Berserker and certain itemizations, you can basically use bonus actions to just knock enemies down. And you can knock down a lot of enemies, unless they're like Ghost or some sort of celestial being. Almost all enemies can be knocked prone in the game. There is no saving throw against being knocked prone. It is disgustingly good. Great subclass. One of the best subclasses in the game. And if you're just a person that's just starting out in the game, Berserker is very easy to pilot. So just an extremely strong subclass. Definitely deserves the S status. What do I think about Wildheart? Wildheart is considerably worse, and I'm going to be putting it in the A tier. Wildheart is good, and there's a lot of things you can do with various Wildhearts in terms of gaining damage immunity, especially along with your rage. It is definitely a fun subclass to pilot. I would say Wildheart is a little bit more difficult to pilot than Berserker, where you just basically go and throw things, but it is a strong subclass, and I do like it. And I have had fun with it. I would not recommend it in honor mode, but in tactician and below, I think Wildheart is a great strategy. Specifically, I like Willy Bearheart. I feel like that's quite good. Just a good overall subclass, but nothing special. What do I think about Wild Magic? Don't use it. Wild Magic's stupid. You're going to see this a couple times where classes use Wild Magic or some variant thereof. It basically does random effects. Randomness is not good in a game like this, guys. You're actually trying to use itemization and things of that nature to decrease the randomness of dice rolls. So by speccing into a subclass that actually has more randomness, It's just a bad idea. Do not use wild magic. It is by far the worst barbarian subclass. Now we're going to be going to Bard, which is another really, really strong choice. Now, just because of how this went, guys, Barbarian is one of the probably the best like martial classes. Now we're going to be looking at one of the best spellcasting classes, which is ironically the Bard. Bard, College of Lore, quite good. I really do like it. I would say it's probably in a high A tier, definitely over Wildheart. So I'm going to pull that up. College of Lore is good. Now I will say this about it: I think College of Lore may be honestly one of the worst bards you can play, but I want to make this absolutely clear. If you are playing under auto mode, Bard is completely disgustingly broken in Baldur's Gate 3. You can literally get out of maybe half to 3/4 of the combat in the entire game with Bard. It is just ridiculous. It uses charisma. Charisma is the single best attribute in the game. No question in my mind about that. Because not only does it scale with your actual damage, but charisma basically gives you better barter prices, and it gives you the ability to most of the dialogue skipping options or the skipping fights using dialogue options use charisma. Now, not all, some are constitution, very similar to some of the sub bosses in Act 2. Like you'll know who I'm talking about. I'm trying not to go into spoilers here, but there are certain other attributes that are important for dialogue. But I will say this: charisma is the most important. And you're going to see other classes that use charisma, like Paladin, like Sorcerer. You're going to see they are extremely strong. And it's just because charisma is an incredibly good stat. So wonderful there. For roleplay reasons, I think Bard probably has some of the biggest roleplay range. So you could build the most different characters. So yeah, College of Lore, pretty nice. College of Swords, 100% S plus tier, above Berserker. 10-1-1 Sword Bard, and I'm going to be doing actually a build guide about this, is probably top 3 builds in the entire game. You can CC even some of the strongest enemies in the game. You can literally CC Raphael. You can CC crazy things. So like other than I think it's like SSW Titan and just 1 or 2 enemies where you'll be at like 60-70%. If you have Helmet of Arcane Acuity and auto itemization, you can just CC anything with a College of Swords Bard. So, confusion, fear, hold person, hold monster. The list goes on and on. They do good martial damage. It's just ridiculous. They're the talking face. People have literally soloed auto mode. Now, that's extremely difficult, but I'm just saying College of Swords Bard is one of the best classes in the game, the best subclass in the game, probably. It's incredibly good. Right up there with some of the monk subclasses that we're going to be talking about later, and Berserker as being the best subclasses. So, absolutely incredible College of Sword Bard. College of Valor, I'm going to put it right there. I would put it even a little bit below College of Lore. College of Valor, I think, is fine. The problem is that it's just kind of difficult because College of Swords is so complete. The College of Lore and College of Valor just kind of drift behind it. And you're going to see this in a number of cases. Berserker, Wild Heart, Wild Magic. It's not as bad. College of Valor and College of Lore both are much better than, let's say, the Barbarian subclasses. But it is dropping off, and most of the time you should be picking College of Swords. But honestly, in Tactician and below, just by picking Bard, you're giving yourself a huge advantage, and you can pick any of these subclasses, and they work out really well. But I will say this, College of Swords is the best for those of you that are power gaming. Now we're going to be going on to the Cleric class, guys. What do I think about Clerics? Cleric is a really interesting class because if you look at my old videos, and I do have old videos talking about this, when I had around 100 hours in the game and Auto Mode did not come out. Cleric has had a big up and down journey for me. So when I started out in the game, I thought, Clerics aren't that good. Then I thought, Clerics are one of the best classes in the game. And then now I'm Clerics are good, very good supportive roles, but not the best classes in the game. Here's what I would say about this. The subclasses of Cleric, you just need to understand that there's only 2, maybe 3 subclasses that you should ever play. So we're going to be going through that. We're going to be starting with the Knowledge Domain. I would not use Knowledge Domain. I would say it's the C tier subclass. There's not really any reason you should ever use Knowledge Domain. Life Domain. Life Domain is really good. I'm going to be putting in the S tier. Cleric as a whole, if I just rated the class itself, and I've been actually, rating each class, it's going to go in the A tier. Now, Cleric's got a lot of things going for it. The only thing that I would say about Cleric is that you're going to notice in Act 3, it just kind of dips off really, really hard in Act 3. Act 1 and Act 2, Life and Light Clerics are incredible, but there comes a point that most of the time just pure outrageous DPS or crowd control is the way to go. And so you're going to notice that a lot of classes that can just deal higher damage is actually better. And the reason is because you get really, really amazing elixirs. You get really amazing potions that can heal you for a huge amount. Life Cleric still has a huge role. And the reason is that you can basically get, the Hell Rider's gloves. You can get gloves that basically put on Blade Ward anytime you healed somebody. So you're going to basically be doing, there's going to be a 50% damage reduction to physical damage, kind of like a Barbarian, basically. And you're going to be getting a situation, I believe it's bludgeoning, piercing, and one other form of damage, basically most physical damage. And you're going to be able to bless your target when you heal them. There's another item for this in the life domain. So life is really good, and life is really one of the only ones with your channel divinity that you can kind of out heal most damage. Most other clerics, it's just not that viable. You could maybe heal one party member, but you're not going to really out heal the amount of damage enemies are putting in. With life, you absolutely can. So it is something that I would recommend, and it is kind of a safety belt in honor mode. In terms of roleplay, I think it's awesome. Like, you are the little healer, the heal bot of the team. Yeah, life is amazing. What do I think about light? Light is absolutely the second best after life. Light is super, super good. You get things like warding flare, so you can basically prevent critical hits against your team oftentimes. You can set enemies on fire. You can basically call down this fireball that you can move around the battlefield and set your enemies aflame, which is really funny and is very good actually in Act 1. It's stupidly good. You can do like a channel divinity, which does radiant damage. It's not the best, but generally any light cleric, especially with like luminous armor, luminous gloves, doing Weaver builds, incredibly good in the mid game, especially in Act 2. I would say light cleric is actually probably the number 1 class in the game. The issue is before Act 2 and after Act 2, it kind of takes a dip. So you could actually spec a character, if you're doing honor, into light domain just for Act 2 specifically. Put on Blood of Lathander. You're just going to destroy everything with Spirit Guardians. And then basically maybe tech out of this in Act 3 and either go to life domain or tech into another DPS-based class. So yeah, it's a really, really good option. Nature domain, do not use it. Tempest domain, pretty good. I would say A tier. There's a lot of things you can do with Tempest domain. You're going to see this as a dip a lot, where characters take a certain levels of Tempest domain and then mix it with Storm Sorcerer. That's probably the number 1 that you're going to see as a multi-class combination. Again, this is more of an honor mode thing. I don't think that most people in a role-play situation are going to be using this as much, but it is a strong option. It's something you need to kind of put out there. And Tempest Domain is strong. It's absolutely a good, viable option. Lightning damage is really good in the game, and there's a lot of items, a ton of items that you can optimize for lightning-based damage. So if you're not doing life and light and you're not playing like really meta builds and you want to do like maybe like a 4 roleplay, I actually have a build guide about that. You can go into Tempest, and it's a great option. Now we're going to go on the Trickery domain. This is a meme. Shadowheart should never have been a Trickery domain cleric. It is stupid. Never do it. Spec Shadowheart out immediately. One of the worst subclasses in the game. Horrible. Never use it. War Domain, it's got some things going on for it. I mean, you got the heavy armor special, like the heavy armor ability or ability to use heavy armor. The problem is life also has this, so there's not like really that many reasons to use War Domain. Get a little bit more damage. You're not really using clerics anyway for their ability to put out DPS. So that's kind of where the War Domain kind of has a problem of sounds good on paper. If you was looking at it, you would think, oh, this is a great option. But in terms of practicality, Ranger, Gloomstalker, that kind of thing, Flow Barbarians, you've got open hand monks, you've got plenty of DPS options in the game, so you're not going to be using War Domain that much. However, it is a great roleplay option, and I do actually like War Domain. I just don't think it's that good, pretty much. Let's talk about Druids, guys. So we went through Cleric, we went through Barbarian, and now we are going to Druids. Druid is a pretty good. It's pretty good, guys. It's pretty good, but it's not amazing. It's like a B tier class, really. If I want to say, just the class itself is about B tier. Now, I have some notes on Druid. The problem I have with Druid is that if you are not a power gamer, if you're underneath honor mode, then it's one of the hardest subclasses to learn how to play. So if I was just getting somebody into Baldur's Gate 3, I would definitely not tell them to learn how to play Druid because I think it has some of the most advanced mechanics. On the other hand, if you are power gaming and you're specifically going for the best builds in the game, other than Circle of the Spores, you're not really going to be using Circle of the Land and Circle of the Moon almost ever. So there's a bit of a problem there. So you can kind of see why I have an issue with Druid. I do think that Druid's going to become stronger as we know more and more about the game, because I do think there's a lot of very interesting interactions that go on with Druid. But I just can't put it as high up as I would like to, because I really like this class, but I just don't think it's that great. Now, where would I put the various subclasses of Druid? Circle of the Land is probably the weakest, and I'm going to put it in like a low C tier. I just don't think there's many reasons you should use Circle of the Land. I messed around with it a little bit, and I was really disappointed and didn't think it. I tried to make a build kind of around it, and it kind of sucked, guys. Circle of the Moon, I mean, with the wild shaping and everything, and just the amount of HP pools you have, you're kind of the closest you can get to being a tank. You're basically the closest you can get to being a tank in BG3, which isn't really a thing in BG3 because DPS is king. But Circle of the Moon is a solid option, and I do like it, and I do think you could build a build around it. Anything Tactician and below, I think Circle of the Moon's going to do just fine for you. For honor mode, I think it's going to be more of a detriment than a help, but it's okay. Circle of Spores, definitely the best subclass of Druid. The reason being there's a item in Act 3 that you can get that you can basically do a certain amount of levels. I believe it's 2 levels in Circle of the Spores. You can go into a Cleric, basically mix these two together, and you can cast Spores, which then haste all 4 members of your party, which is insanely good. I've been seeing a lot of builds pop up about this for beating honor mode. Circle of the Spores absolutely has a place in the metagame. If you're just role-playing, it's also really cool, like the way that the Spores kind of work. So I think there's a lot going on for Circle of the Spores. I really like the class. I would put it there probably as a pretty strong contender in A tier, like mid A tier. Definitely not an S tier class, but, very, very strong. Now we're going to be going on to Fighter. Fighter is really interesting because I'm really split about Fighter. The thing I would say about Fighter is that, so I have a lot of notes on Fighter. Fighter is probably the best monoclass option in the game. So there's that, and that's something really I have to say. If you're new to the game, if you're just learning the game for the first time, Fighter is one of the best classes to pick. I'm going to be breaking it down by subclass, but the nice thing is each of the subclasses isn't bad. Not bad at all. There are some subclasses like BattleMaster that are a lot better, but ultimately, if you're new to the game, you don't know what you want to play, definitely pick Fighter. Fighter is incredibly good, and you can basically do just 12 Fighter. You get more feats than other classes. You basically get your feats faster. It's just really good. I think Fighter, if you're just starting out in the game, is amazing. And if you run under Tactician, you can literally go 12 Fighter and just destroy the game. Even on Tactician, I think Fighter is really good. And, you can use heavy armor. You can use almost any weapon. It's kind of a no-brainer class, especially if you're playing Champion. It's probably lately like the most, I don't want to say idiot-proof, but the most beginner-friendly build in the game where you can just basically run through things without thinking about it. BattleMaster is by far the best class in Fighter, and it is an S tier subclass. A lot of the like abilities that you have, where you can basically use your your points in order to actually do additional damage on BattleMaster is really good. Yeah, I like BattleMaster a lot. Personally, the problem is that the College of Sword bot is a little bit better with the slashing flourish, and the Berserker with the Barbarian Berserker. So that's the only problem with Fighter. Most classes are also going to be taking dips in the Fighter too for action surge. So what I want to say is, even when you're not running a total Fighter, you're probably having at least 2 levels of Fighter in your build. And because of that, you could really say Fighter is a backbone of a lot of some of the best builds in the game. It also I believe it starts out with Constitution-based saves, which is one of the best saving throws. So Fighter is quite good. Really do like it. BattleMaster, great. Champion, I'm going to put in probably like high A tier. Champion, if you don't know what you're doing in the game, basically what Champion does is it reduces the number between 1 and 20. Normally you have to roll a 20 to crit. It will reduce it to 19. The thing is, there's a lot of things like Savrock's Helmet. There's a lot of different items that will reduce this further and can stack. So I believe you can get it down to either 15 or 14. So you're going to basically be quitting like 25% of the time, at least 20% of the time, at least at 16. So because of that, it's just a really great option. You can just put great gear on this. You don't have to activate anything. You don't have to think about anything. You run up there, you hit them. It's crazy good. You're going to be wearing heavy plate. You're going to have really high AC. Yeah, Champion's incredibly good. So now we're going to go on to Eldritch Knight. Now, Eldritch Knight is actually a really cool class. I'm going to be putting it in like high B tier, but this is what's a big asterisk because Eldritch Knight has a lot of things going for it. There's throw builds that you can use Tavern Brawler on that actually do Eldritch Knight instead of Berserker. So that's kind of really nice. You can bond weapons so that they basically just fly back to your hand. So you get a lot more range of weapons than just the regular standard throw weapons like, Dwarven Thrower, Returning Pike, Nerulia. You have a lot more options with the Eldritch Knight. I do really like Eldritch Knight and think it's good. It's just unfortunately with BattleMaster just being basically the strongest class in Fighter and Champion being just easier to palette, it just does put Eldritch Knight kind of at the bottom of that list, but still really, really good. Now, what do I think about Monk overall? Monk is another one of these, like Bard and like Barbarian, that is an S+ tier subclass, where Fighter was probably sitting at maybe like a net of A, with BattleMaster maybe dipping into S, and then Eldritch Knight dipping into B. Monk is just an S tier. It's just an S tier class 100%. There's no question about that. Now, the problem about Monk is there is one specific subclass, which is Way of the Open Hand, that is just by far the best option you can take. Way of the Four Elements and Way of Shadows is much, much inferior to Way of the Open Hand, and you probably should never pick these. Way of the Four Elements, I would say specifically, I do not like. I've tried to mess with it quite a few times. You basically get kind of like magical abilities along with your monk actually just hitting things with his fist. The problem being is that you're going to see kind of like the Eldritch Knight problem, kind of like the Arcane Trickster in the Rogue. Most martial classes you do not want to mix with magic classes. You don't want to be a battle mage, basically. You want to be either a physical damage dealer or you want to be a magical caster. The only one that kind of gets to have the cake and eat it too is College of Swords Bards, which is just completely broken. But yeah, Way of the Four Elements doesn't get to cheat like College of Swords, and it's not that great. Way of the Open Hand right here below. So these three subclasses are the best in the game, I'm going to tell you right now. which is College of Sword Bard, Way of the Open Hand, and Berserker. Way of the Open Hand is going to sit right below College of Swords Bard, is the second most broken build in the entire game. If you are playing under Honor mode, it is the most broken build in the entire game, because with the damage rider interactions and the amount of times you're hitting per turn, especially if you play as Asterion, your Ascended Asterion, you get a 1d10 necrotic. You can put so many fire, radiant. I mean, the list goes on and on. You can hit just for hundreds and I believe even low thousands if you set it up correctly with damage rider per turn. It is just disgusting how good Way of the Open Hand is. You're going to be knocking enemies prone. You basically have incredible single target damage per round, even though it doesn't Nova as well as other classes. And for those of you that don't know, Nova is basically the ability to put out damage in a single round or in 1 to 2 rounds. It is by far the best sustained damage in the game. Way of the Open Hand is really good. The only problem about Way of the Open Hand is that in Act 1, specifically if you're playing on Honor mode, your characters are squishy. If you're playing below Honor mode and you just want to absolutely run through the game and just see what the story is, you could, instead of playing on Explore, and I do have a video about the difficulty options in Baldur's Gate 3 and which one you should pick, so definitely go check that out. It's just been uploaded. But if you want to basically make any other difficulty other than Honor feel like Explore, just pick Way of the Open Hand Monk. It's just disgustingly good. Another amazing thing about Monk that I wanted to put in there, and I wrote a lot about in my notes, was that monks basically have specific items just for them. So you're never going to be really competing with other classes. And it's generally very easy to turn what's the best in slot for you, because you're just looking for things that add radiant damage or add necrotic damage to unarmored strikes. So like a lot of these, like Gloves of Uninhibited Kashigo, you have boots, you have like the Gloves of Soul Catching from Raphael and Hope. There's a lot of items like this that are just absolutely broken on monks. And monks get some of the best items in the entire game. What about the Way of Shadows? More interesting than the Way of the Four Elements, and I do think there's some builds that could use this. The issue being a Way of Shadows is that it kind of doesn't know what it wants to be. It kind of wants to be like a Gloomstalker Ranger and kind of Alpha Strike, but on the other hand, it's a monk that's going to be going in and dealing damage from close range. Most of the time, if you're trying to do an Alpha Strike, you want to be further away. Not a bad subclass. Definitely got some viability, but honestly, if you're playing Monk, you're going to be playing Way of the Open Hand unless you're going just strictly for a role play situation. But Monk is probably up there as either the second or third best class in the game. It kind of splits second, honestly, with Barbarian, with Bard being by far the strongest class in the current meta. Monk is, it's right there, guys. I mean, in some ways, you could say below Tactician and below Honor, you could say Way of the Open Hand is actually number 1 along with Bard. So really debatable there, but incredibly good class. That's the long and short of it. Now we are going to the Paladins. Now, Paladin is an interesting class because what I want to say about Paladin is it's one of the best classes for new players to play, but it is also one of the most frustrating classes for new players to play. And the reason being there is that, number one, the power fantasy on Paladins is amazing. They look really cool. They have some of the coolest looking gear in the game. You really feel like you're in Baldur's Gate 3. You really roleplay. You have this divinity aspect of it, of like you're embodying the sense of ideals from a deity. Here's the issue that I have with Paladin is it's so easy to break your oath even when you don't intend to, and the consequences for breaking your oath, you're going to have to pay 1,000 gold. You cannot respec or bad. And so Paladin is a great dip. Oftentimes people take like 2 ranks in the Paladins just to get smite. But the problem being about Paladin is it is a little bit more difficult to play. You kind of have to know how to pilot it a little bit better. But it does just do ridiculous Nova damage. One of the best Nova classes in the game. On the subclasses, I would put Oathbreaker way below the others. I'm going to put it in C. I do think that being an Oathbreaker is kind of bad and doesn't give you that much, to be honest with you. Of the others, I would say Oath of Vengeance probably is the best. in my opinion, because I just feel like Oath of Vengeance is the easiest to keep without breaking your oath. In terms of strength, I would put Oath of the Ancients right up there. Oath of Devotion, I feel, is a bit worse, maybe in B tier. But to be honest with you, all of the Paladin subclasses are really good. I would put Paladin in Tactician and below as an S tier class, but the problem is that I think in honor mode, that risk of breaking your oath and the cost inherent in it, especially because you're so gold deprived, kind of pulls it down a little bit. I really do like paladins, and they are really good. Another problem is because you're so smite dependent. What you're going to notice in honor mode and higher difficulties is because the cost of long rest is higher, you want classes like monk or like barbarian where you can just take a short rest and you're regaining most of your charges, right? Like monk, once you short rest, you're going to be regaining all your key points. Barbarian, even when they do have rage charges down, they can still do a very significant amount of damage. Paladins, once their smites are down, their damage just drops off the cliff. So because of that, you're going to notice a lot worse damage in Act 1 specifically. So I would say that pulls Paladins down a little bit. And I want to put them in the S tier, but I really feel like the more of an A tier class. You know what? I'm going to put Oath of Devotion also here in A because I feel like, yeah, no, it's B. It's B. But net, it's an A class. It's an A class. Probably don't play Oathbreaker. It is kind of cool for story reasons, but that's about it. But Paladin's great. It just, there is some issues with it. It's an amazing class, looks amazing, great for role playing. Honor mode can Nova incredibly hard, but just realize that even though its damage per turn in the first 1-2 rounds is extremely good, you're going to be more dependent on spell slots, and you do kind of have that breaking the oath problem, which can be pretty significant and incur quite a bit of cost. So now let's go on to Ranger. Now, Ranger is weird because number one, Beastmaster you're not going to use. Let's just take Beastmaster and put it where it belongs, which is in D tier, along with Trickery Domain. I messed around with Beastmaster. You almost can't pick anything worse, guys. It's so bad. It's so bad. It doesn't matter if it's for roleplay, honor mode. You're just putting yourself at a huge disadvantage if you play Beastmaster. Don't do it. Now we're going to look at the other two. Gloomstalker is by far the best subclass of Ranger. And Gloomstalker is really, really good, especially for alpha striking. Like when you pair Gloomstalker up with, like, I believe it's the Thief, you can get really, really high damage per rounds. You have bonus actions. You can basically be doing crossbow builds where you just pew, 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 pew. Yeah, there's great itemization for this class also. And generally, striking hard, striking fast, and striking from range is a really good option in Baldur's Gate 3. So this is kind of very good in terms of the metagame of what Baldur's Gate 3 wants you to do, specifically on honor mode, which is DPS in a very short amount of time. So, kind of what I was talking about going Nova on the Paladins, also kind of is something on the Gloomstalker where it really is very, very good. Hunter, not bad either. Not bad either. I'll put it in A. The only reason I feel Hunter is a little bit worse than Gloomstalker is I just do like that Gloomstalker, the ability to kind of hit first, hit fast. But Hunter's also good. As long as you avoid Beastmaster, you're going to be good with Ranger. Most of the time, Ranger, you're not going to be speccing into it by itself. You're almost always going to be speccing into it with Rogue or something that boosts your bonus actions, like the Thief subclass in Rogue. You're going to be doing a multi-class with Ranger. You're not going to just be going 12 Ranger. Because honestly, just Ranger by itself is not that good. But when you multi-class it, it can be very good. But because of that, like if I was putting it in an overall ranking, I would probably put it at like maybe 6 to 8 of the 12 classes in game. It's definitely not that great because just its solo viability. Well, like for instance, Barbarian, you could say under Tactician, you can just run the game with 12 Barbarian, 12 Fighter, 12 Paladin. Ranger, I just don't feel like that's as good of an option. So I would kind of put that as a thing where, like, understand that you're going to kind of be hurting yourself a little bit. So I wouldn't recommend it. Let's move on now to Rogue. So Rogue is another one of these that basically uses one way above the other two. So it's another class that basically one subclass is way better than the other two. So Arcane Trickster, it goes right down here with Trickery Domain and Beastmaster as some of the worst subclasses in the game. Never use this. Stupidly bad. Yeah, it's super bad. It's just don't ever use it. Assassin, pretty good. I would say like a B tier class. There's definitely builds you can do where you could mix Assassin and like let's say like a Gloomstalker or something. Assassin's good, guys, and it is very fun to play. And Alpha Striking is very good. So Rogue is one of those ones that you're almost never going to see just 12 Rogue. If you do, you're hurting yourself. There's no reason to go pure Rogue, and yeah, it's just kind of stupid because most of the time even with 3 to 4 points in Rogue, you're going to be getting enough where you already can pick most of the locks in the game, and or you could just like knock it with a wizard. So there's not really much of a reason to go into like the high tier Rogue. So like meaning like eight levels in Rogue or 10 levels in Rogue or God forbid 12 levels in Rogue. But Assassin is a good subclass, and I do like it. I do think that 3 to 4 for Rogue in terms of levels. Either get 3 for your subclass. You basically, if you go in a rogue, you're going to get 3 levels. And then maybe 4 to get that feat. That's about where you should stop. And then you should just, continue on. If you're doing a role play as a rogue, you're probably best off with assassin. If you're going to do probably what you should not do and do 12 in rogue, you're probably best off with going assassin because at least then your damage per turn, especially in the first turn, is going to be very high. So you're going to be able to kill very high priority targets, which is definitely a good thing to be able to do. In terms of subclasses of Rogue, by far Thief is the best subclass. You get extra bonus actions. A lot of classes are going to be using this. The Thief Berserker, so Berserker counterpart uses this. Way of the Open Hand uses this. Even sometimes College of Swords uses this to get extra bonus actions. But most of the time, it's the Way of the Open Hand, the Berserker. Even sometimes I've heard BattleMasters actually do this as well. But Thief, just for that extra bonus action, does a lot of classes that it will, they'll take a dip and they'll basically get 3 in Thief, in Rogue, and then subclass in the Thief, just specifically for this bonus action. So it is very strong, but, stop at 4, don't go past that, as we've talked about with the other subclasses of Rogue. Now, we're going to be talking about the Sorcerers. Okay, Sorcerers. So Sorcerers got the same thing going on that, what was it? What was the other one that had this situation? We were already talking about Wild Magic. It was Barbarian. So let's just already take Wild Magic and put it where it belongs, which is in D tier. Don't use Wild Magic. We actually put it in C tier on the Barbarian. Same thing going on with Wild Magic. I knew there was another class that used it, and here we are again. Wild Magic should not be something you depend on. You're trying to limit the amount of randomness that happens in the game, and by using Wild Magic, you just make yourself more liable to bad things happening. Definitely in an auto mode, you should never, ever, ever use Wild Magic. But even in a regular one, I would not recommend it because it's just going to be frustrating if you lose a fight to some stupid status effect. Like one time I used Wild Magic and I just became paralyzed after using a spell. It's like, that's so bad. Like it's just you're betting on a random chance. You'll gamble. Don't use Wild Magic. Now these two, Draconic Bloodlines and Storm Sorcerer, are both really good. Now Sorcerer, I'm going to say this right away. For mages, Sorcerers are the best mages in the game, and the reason is because of meta magic. Meta magic is incredibly strong. You can twin spells. You can increase the distance of spells. Meta magic is just kind of broken, and especially if you look into Sourceonomics, so you can basically use meta magic to regain spell slots and use spell slots to regain meta magic, You can basically make it where meta magic is incredibly broken, and they probably need to patch this. But of these two subclasses, I think they're both in the S tier, to be honest with you. Storm Sorcery, you're going to be pairing this with the Tempest Domain Cleric that I was talking about. So that's something that's very common. There it is, Tempest Domain Cleric. So if you use Storm Sorcery, you're going to be multi-classing with Tempest Domain Cleric, and this is an incredibly good build. I believe they do 6/6 on this, but I've heard multiple variations, but I believe the most common is 6/6. And Draconic Bloodline, if you're just literally going to just play a sorcerer, I would say Draconic Bloodline is the probably the best subclass to pick, and probably is like the meta pick for sorcerers. Sorcerers are really good in the game overall. Sorcerers and wizards kind of compete hand in hand. Now, I will say this for myself, I prefer wizards. The reason I prefer wizards is because the ability to learn spells allow me to have more tactical options. And I think specifically for honor mode, this is really good to have more tactical options. However, when you're looking at just how good a class is, you got to look at its just overall power and also its role playing ability. I think Sorcerers has some of the coolest role playing in the game, have incredibly good gear that looks awesome. And, each of these plays really different. Like Draconic Bloodline plays really different to Storm Sorceries. So you're going to have multiple games where you can kind of completely play as a different character, even though you're both playing as a sorcerer. Wizards does have that, but we're going to be talking about the schools of Wizards and how a lot of them are kind of trash. So yeah, I would say this is pretty good, and I would say if you're going to pick a mage, either pick a sorcerer or a wizard. We're going to be talking about the warlock and why it sucks. But yeah, definitely sorcerer, really good in the game, and probably the best being Draconic Bloodline, or if you want a multi-class Tempest Domain / Storm Sorcery. So now we are going to be going on to Warlock. Now I'm going to tell you this, guys. I don't see any reason why you should play Warlock, and here's my rationale. Yes, you can do like Machine Gun Eldritch Blast. Yes, you can put out moderately good DPS. The problem about Warlock is when you have wizards that can learn pretty much any spell in the game and have so many tactical options and are really strong in Act 3 once you get the spell save DC up with itemization, or you have sorcerers that have incredible meta magic, can haste multiple members of your team almost instantly, can use tempestuous flight to fly around the map, so great mobility. And then you have warlocks that just kind of sit there, and it's like, well, I guess I'm going to be using Eldritch Blast for the majority of the game. It's not bad. I don't want to say warlocks are terrible, but I will say this. So I feel like the Fiend is better. I feel like that's kind of in the C, but I honestly think Great Old One and Archfey probably are D tier. It's just a lot of times I don't see why you would use a Warlock. And every time I've played with a Warlock, I really have been way underwhelmed and was like, my God, let me just go back to either playing a Wizard, which is my first choice, or a Sorcerer, which is honestly probably the meta choice and probably the strongest choice. So I wouldn't really recommend playing as a Warlock. I also think the companion that you get with a Warlock, so Will, is the worst companion in the game. And I'm going to be talking about that. I'm going to be doing a companion kind of tier list again after all these hours and telling you what I think about the companions. But Will is the worst companion. I'll just tell you that right now. And Warlock is one of the worst classes. So it kind of goes hand in hand. Would not recommend it. Probably if one class that I would say both for honor mode and for the base game that I would recommend you do not play, it would be Warlock. Finally, guys, we go to Wizards. So you see this, you're like, oh my God, look at all these schools. We've got Abjuration, Conjuration, Divination, Enhancement, Evocation, Illusory, Necromancy, Transmutation. Let me just break this down to you on Wizards. Wizards are incredibly good. They're either an S tier or very, very, very high A tier. However, of the schools, there's only 2 or 3 that are any good. And the reason is because some of them are so much better than the others, you probably won't ever use the others. So probably in early Act 1 and early Act 2, one of the best things you can do is get a Divination Wizard. They're going to be right up here in the S class, incredibly good. So what you're going to be able to do here is you're going to be able to make opponents miss and make you hit. So you're, again, reducing the risk of random chance. You're basically controlling the dice. And so Divination Wizards, pretty much throughout the game, but specifically in Act 1, are really good. I would say in Act 2, Act 3, they lose a little bit of power, especially in Act 3, but I really like Divination School. I think it's fantastic. Now, Conjuration's not bad, especially if you want to like conjure elementals and stuff like that, which is a very valid strategy. You can just conjure elementals, soak, kind of use them as tanks. So Conjuration is not bad at all. I think it's a pretty strong class. I think probably Abjuration is probably another S tier class. I think they're really, really good. Everything else, transmutation, you do get the transmutation stone. There's reasons you would have this as kind of at your camp, so you may make a camp follower into transmutation. So I'll put that probably in B because it's definitely under conjuration. And it's definitely under abjuration and divination, 100%, which are probably the two best schools. Everything else, necromancy, don't do it. It's so annoying in the game to get dead bodies to follow you around. They are just so glitched out. It just, I wish it could work, and I want necromancy to be good, but just try it out for like an hour and you'll see why. It's just so frustrating to play. You'll never be a necromancer. Even though it's fine in terms of power, it's just not worth the hassle. There's so many other things that are funner to play and also do better damage. So yeah, necromancy sucks. Illusion, I think I played around with this maybe like 3 or 4 times. There's not really any reason you're going to be choosing illusion, guys. Evocation, another really good one. I would put this right up there with conjuration. So, abjuration, divination. I would say divination, abjuration are probably the two best. But evocation, I mean, you could put that right up there on S2. These are kind of all battling. So you do have a number of subclasses that are okay. Conjuration, like I said, if you want to conjure elementals, that's good. Enhancement, again, maybe you'll have it as a camp follower. You're not going to be running this as a major character. Enhancement sucks. Yeah, so that's basically it, guys. I'm going to kind of sum up my thoughts now because we've covered every class, we've covered every subclass, and I'm going to be giving you kind of my thoughts on what I was saying in terms of the best classes in the game and kind of rating them in that way. So let's start out with Bard. Bard is the #1 class in the game. College of Swords is so disgustingly broken. The TLDR is if you just want to absolutely destroy the game, pick up College of Sword Bard, get Arcane Acuity, control all monsters, do huge damage. Bard is incredibly good. Second, in terms of, I think where in the game, the second probably best class in the game is Monk. Specifically, the Way of the Open Hand Monk is extremely good. There's so many damage rider interactions, and even on honor mode, where a lot of that's been actually cut down on, you can do consistently hundreds of damage per round. You can knock your opponent prone. Monk is just either tied for #1, probably pre-honor, or tied for #2 in honor mode. So I think in honor mode, I think Bard is #1, and then Barbarian and Monk tied for #2. I think that in under honor mode, actually Monk may be #1, tied with Bard, and Barbarian would be #2. So now we go on to Barbarian. I think this is basically in that #2, #3 slot. Specifically, the Berserker is the best subclass of Barbarian by far. Although Wildheart is definitely a really reasonable option. Incredibly good class, guys. It's really, really good. And one thing I will tell you guys, if you're either new to the game or that you're playing honor mode, try to pick more martial classes. So pick like maybe a 3-to-1. The more spell-based classes that you have in the game, the more you're going to be long resting, and generally the more risk you have of doing reduced DPS. Because the spell-based classes, if you mess them up and you use spells kind of stupidly, you can really drop your DPS very, very quickly. Well, that won't be the case on martial classes. So I would recommend running like a 3-1 or at max a 2-2 split between martial classes and spell-based classes. A lot of the other classes, Paladin, I would say definitely would be great in Tactician and below. I think Paladin really, really drops off in honor mode for specific reasons that I've discussed, which being is, breaking your oath is extremely costly, and it's so dependent on Nova damage and spell slots that you're going to be long-lasting a lot. Rogue, you should never be using it really as a monoclass, but as a multi-class, it is quite good. But I would probably put that as maybe like where a Paladin would be 4. I would say Rogue is definitely like 5th or 6th because it is so many classes use it as a dip, and they will go 3 or 4 into Rogue, but almost nobody's going to 12 in Rogue. Cleric, right at there at that 5 to 6 range. Cleric is such a good support class, specifically if you're using Life or Light Domain. The other domains really drop off a lot. I would say the third domain that actually has really good validity is Tempest, if you're specifically pairing it with Storm Sorcerer, 6/6 Storm Sorcerer, Tempest Cleric, really strong option. Most of the other stuff I would say kind of avoid because there's better options in the game. And then we start to go the classes that have really kind of dubious. It's mainly for role play. They don't have that much utility. Druid, I think Circle of the Spores can still be used. Like I was saying, that 4-man haste, but that takes actually gear. So you're not going to be doing that at the start of the game. It is really fun to role play. So Druid would probably be somewhere in that 7 to 8 class of where I don't think it's bad, but it's definitely not a great class. Fighter. Fighter is just an overall great class, and I would say it may be in the top 3 or 4 if you're playing in Tactician and below. The problem being in honor mode is that there's too many things that are broken, and Fighter is just really good and kind of designed well. So it doesn't really scale like the broken options like Way of the Open Hand, College of Swords, or Berserker. Uh, but it's probably the most balanced class. And if I had to say, like, 2 years from now with a bunch of other patches, what I think probably will maintain being good, it's probably Fighter. Because I feel like a lot of this other stuff, like Way of the Open Hand, College of Swords, and Tavern Brawler, may get nerfed in later patches. So that is something to note, is that if you're watching this long after the day, definitely drop a comment below and I'll tell you, like, hey, is this still valid, or has this been, changed a lot in an update? So yeah, there we go, guys. I really do hope you've enjoyed this list. The last few, Ranger specifically, I would say Wizards and Sorcerers. So I want to talk about Wizards and Sorcerers real quick before the end of the video. I think most of the time you should choose a wizard, even though I think sorcerer is better. And the reason being is, like I said, utility. When you have all those spells of the wizard and you can basically put any spell of the game, a lot of times for your mages, your martial classes are going to be the ones actually killing people, but you want the mages to do CC, or you want them to be able to set up something specifically. And so having that greater pool of spells makes wizards a little bit more of a jack of all trades and MacGyver, if you want to say. So I would choose Wizards, Sorcerers. They're right up there at 8 or 9. Even though they're both really good, I just don't think they have the utility of a lot of the other classes. And so that's why I'm kind of putting them back there, even though as mage classes, they're basically tied with Sorcerer maybe being a little bit better, specifically maybe Draconic Bloodline. Warlock probably don't play, to be honest. I kind of talked about why Warlock, I feel, really falls behind. And then Ranger is a good class, but only when subclassed with, multi-class with other classes. So it's really hard for me to recommend Ranger, because even though I think it's quite good, especially Gloomstalker, it's one of those ones that's only really good once you pair it with other classes. And also, I feel like the Ranger, like, you can do Drizzt Do'Urden, you can do some definitely cool role-playing stuff, but I do feel like it has less of a breadth to the class, especially when we talk about how bad Beastmaster is. So yeah, hopefully that covers pretty much everything. I try to be very inclusive in this video and kind of give you the TLDR at the end, even though the TLDR is also quite long. But yeah, hopefully that answers your question, guys. Hit me down in the comments below. Let me know your questions and I'll try to help you with your builds. I really hope you enjoyed this. I put a lot of time and effort into this, probably like 2 weeks writing the notes. And then probably, what is it? It's a very long video, guys. So yeah, please hit that like, please subscribe, and definitely I'll see you guys in the next video. Leave me down questions in the comments below, and I'll get back to you.